The most dangerous prison is not made of bars or stone. It is constructed in silence, invisibly, within the boundaries of your own mind. And the unsettling truth is that most people are serving a life sentence without ever realizing it. They wake each morning believing they are free, but their thoughts are borrowed, their desires are shaped, and their decisions are nudged by forces they cannot see. The world whispers in their ears, and they mistake those whispers for their own voice. Every day you are manipulated by the news you consume, the advertisements that flicker past your eyes, the subtle expectations of friends, family, and colleagues. Even the stories you tell yourself late at night about who you are, what you should want, how life is supposed to unfold, are not entirely yours. They have been seeded, watered, and pruned by culture, authority, and circumstance. But here is the paradox. While manipulation surrounds us, freedom is not impossible. Carl Jung, Marcus Aurelius, and even Kierkegaard believed in a freedom deeper than any political condition. They argued that true liberation begins when the mind learns to see itself clearly, to withstand the pressure of external influence, and to resist the unconscious scripts that direct our lives. That is why the question we must confront is this: how do we build a mind that cannot be manipulated? Not a mind that rejects influence entirely. That would be impossible. But one that stands firm like a rooted tree, bending but never breaking in the winds of persuasion. By the time you reach the end of this reflection, you will not only see the hidden strings that tug at your decisions and emotions, you will also hold tools to begin cutting them. But let us begin with the sting of doubt. How many of your opinions are truly yours? If you were stripped of your upbringing, your culture, your social circle, your media habits, how many of your convictions would remain? Have you noticed how quickly people can be swayed by a slogan repeated often enough, by a headline shared by enough friends, by a celebrity endorsement that whispers, "This is what people like you should believe"? If others are manipulated so easily, what makes you so sure you are immune? Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Think carefully about that. Most of the time, you don't know why you act the way you do. You justify decisions after the fact, weaving stories about your motivations. But those decisions often spring not from your conscious will, but from hidden drives, unexamined fears, and invisible influences. Manipulation thrives in those shadows. The first step toward freedom is not defiance, but awareness, shining a light into the corners of your mind where unseen hands might be steering you. Picture a man sitting alone in his apartment at midnight, scrolling through his phone. His eyelids are heavy, his mind is blurred. An advertisement for a luxury watch flashes across the screen. He has never cared much about watches before, yet something stirs inside him. The watch gleams like an emblem of respect, achievement, belonging. Suddenly he imagines himself being noticed, admired. A week later, he makes the purchase, convinced it was his choice. But was it really? Or was the decision planted in fertile soil? The soil of insecurity, of longing for recognition, of unconscious desire? The manipulation was invisible, yet effective. This is the battlefield of the human mind. If you are not awake to it, you will be conquered without even knowing there was a war. Jung understood that the unconscious is not just a personal storehouse of forgotten memories and instincts. It is also collective. It carries archetypes, myths, and deep patterns shared across humanity. Propagandists, advertisers, and leaders, sometimes deliberately, sometimes by intuition, tap into these ancient currents. They play the chords of timeless stories, the hero rising against enemies, the villain threatening safety, the longing for unity, the fear of exile. People respond without realizing why. They dance to the tune of archetypes that existed long before them. Have you ever wondered why certain political slogans ignite entire nations while others vanish unnoticed? It is rarely about the literal words. It is about resonance with the unconscious. To resist manipulation, you must learn to hear those chords, to recognize when ancient myths are being played upon your nervous system. Otherwise, you are swept into currents that belong not to you, but to the crowd. But resisting manipulation is not the same as becoming cynical. Cynicism is another prison. To live in suspicion of every word and gesture is to live trapped in fear. The goal is different. The Stoics called it an inner citadel, a fortress of clarity. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." If you do not choose those colors deliberately, others will choose them for you. The project of freedom is not to distrust every voice, but to choose the palette with which you paint your inner world. One of the most ancient colors in that palette is fear. Fear manipulates more effectively than logic, more efficiently than reason, more rapidly than persuasion. It bypasses the mind and enters through the body. The pulse quickens, the palms sweat, and suddenly the story itself is irrelevant. You simply want relief. Politicians know this. Media outlets know this. Even your peers sometimes unconsciously use it. Daniel Kahneman, in his research on decision-making, showed how the human brain makes emotional choices first, rational justifications later. Fear takes advantage of this, slipping through the cracks in consciousness before you can respond. What then is the antidote? Not to banish fear. That would be unrealistic, but to slow down the space between stimulus and response. Viktor Frankl, who survived the concentration camps, wrote that between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose. In that choice lies our growth and our freedom. Expanding that space is like fortifying your citadel. It is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear speak louder than your awareness. But perhaps you wonder, can anyone truly become immune to manipulation? Isn't suggestion baked into our nature? And yes, it is. We are social creatures. Suggestibility is part of our survival. The goal is not to eradicate influence, but to become conscious of it. A tree bends in the wind. It does not uproot itself at every gust. Likewise, a mind with awareness may feel the pull of persuasion, but it does not topple with every wave. Think of awareness as a muscle. Each time you notice the hidden levers behind a message, each time you pause before reacting, you strengthen it. Have you ever been on the verge of buying something, then suddenly thought, "Wait, I don't even want this. I just thought I did." That moment of recognition is your awareness muscle flexing. Jung believed that the greatest vulnerability to manipulation lies in the shadow, the repressed parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. Here lies a paradox. The less you know about your own shadow, the easier it is for someone else to use it against you. Repressed anger makes you easy to provoke. Repressed envy makes you easy to tempt. Repressed loneliness makes you easy to recruit into groups that promise belonging. Integration of the shadow, acknowledging those parts without shame, removes the hooks others could use to pull you. A person who knows their shadow cannot be so easily puppeteered by it. This is why self-reflection is not indulgence but armor. Socrates declared that the unexamined life is not worth living. In our time, the unexamined life is not just unworthy, it is dangerous, because it becomes a blank page on which others can write. Reflection does not mean endless rumination. It means asking again and again, why do I believe this? Who benefits from me believing it? What fear or desire is being stirred right now? These questions do not make you paranoid. They make you sovereign. And sovereignty of the mind is the closest thing to true freedom you will ever know. During the Korean War, prisoners of war faced what was then called brainwashing. The methods used were not always violent. They were subtle, almost invisible. Prisoners were asked to make small concessions, to write seemingly harmless criticisms of their own country, to agree with statements that appeared trivial. Over time, these small agreements snowballed into larger ones. Some prisoners eventually collaborated with their captors, not through brute force, but through tiny steps of consent. Psychologists later studied this and named it the foot-in-the-door technique. Once you say yes to something small, it becomes easier to say yes to something bigger. This is not confined to wartime prisons. It happens in marketing campaigns, political messaging, even personal relationships. Someone asks you for a small favor. Later, they ask for a larger one. You think, I've already agreed once, what's the harm in continuing? Without noticing, your sense of choice has been reshaped. This is why manipulation so often hides in plain sight. not in grand overtures, but in small nudges that wear down your resistance. And notice how often these manipulations bypass reason and target identity. Instead of persuading you with logic, someone appeals to your self-image. Someone like you would agree with this. If you're a decent person, you'll see things this way. These phrases do not challenge your mind. They hook your sense of self. And because most people cling tightly to their labels, nationality, political affiliation, profession, even gender roles, they respond instinctively, without examining whether the thought aligns with their deeper values. But here is a liberating truth. You are not your labels. You are not your passport, not your job title, not your political party, not the stories others tell about you. You are something more fluid, more vast, more mysterious than any single word can capture. Jung insisted that to become whole is to undergo individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, distinct from the unconscious pressures of the collective. Individuation does not mean isolation. It does not mean rejecting community. It means standing in your own soil so firmly that you cannot be uprooted by the crowd. This is a difficult path. Individuation requires courage, the courage to step away from the herd, to bear the loneliness of thinking for yourself, to risk misunderstanding. Kierkegaard once wrote that the crowd is untruth. To resist the crowd is to feel solitude. But solitude is not always emptiness. Sometimes it is the birthplace of freedom. Jung knew this intimately. For years he wrestled with his unconscious, sketching visions, recording dreams, dialoguing with inner figures. Others called him eccentric, even mad. Yet from that inner confrontation came insights that continue to shape psychology and philosophy today. Jung dared to descend into the depths of his own psyche so that he could return with truth. Have you ever noticed how exhausting it can be to constantly adjust yourself to the crowd? To pretend, to perform, to say the right things in the right way? This is manipulation of the self by the self. A kind of inner propaganda where you suppress your own thoughts for the sake of belonging. But belonging purchased at the cost of authenticity is fragile. It collapses the moment the group changes direction. And groups always change direction. This is why Jung's call to individuation is not a rejection of influence, but a reshaping of it. Influence will always exist. We are not isolated islands. We are shaped by culture, language, family, and history. But there is a difference between being shaped unconsciously and choosing your influences consciously. Nietzsche urged us to become who you are. He warned of the herd mentality, where individuals surrender their will to the collective. But he also recognized that no one becomes themselves in isolation. We become through dialogue, struggle, and relationship. The challenge is to choose consciously which voices you let shape you. Ask yourself, does this influence align with my deepest values, or is it trying to rent space in my mind for its own ends? Discernment is a skill, and like all skills, it grows with practice. Neuroscientists tell us that attention is the currency of the brain. Whatever you give your attention to repeatedly carves neural pathways, strengthening certain habits of thought while weakening others. So what do you give your attention to each day? Social media feeds engineered to provoke and agitate? Gossip-filled conversations? Or ideas, practices, and relationships that expand your perspective and deepen your sense of truth? If you want a mind that cannot be manipulated, you must guard your attention as you would guard your most precious possession. Because it is. Here is another truth worth considering. Manipulation rarely succeeds unless it offers you something you already want. Fear, recognition, belonging, pleasure, these are the currencies of influence. If you crave security, you will follow the one who promises to protect you. If you crave belonging, you will obey the group that promises to include you. If you crave status, you will buy the product that whispers prestige. Manipulation does not create desire from nothing. It hijacks what already exists within you. This is why Jung insisted on bringing desire into consciousness. Until you examine your desires, they will steer you blindly. Ask yourself, how many of your desires are truly yours? Do you really want the promotion, or do you want to be seen as successful? Do you truly crave the luxury item, or do you crave the recognition it signals? How many of your wants would vanish if no one else could see them? This is not about rejecting desire altogether. It is about seeing desire clearly without disguise. Because when you see it clearly, it loses its power to be used against you. But living with such awareness is not comfortable. Comfort comes from drifting with the current, believing what others believe, desiring what others desire. Awareness feels heavy at first. It means pausing when others rush forward. It means questioning when others nod along. Kierkegaard called this the dizziness of freedom. To stand alone with your own mind can feel like standing on the edge of a cliff. Yet it is from that cliff that you finally see the landscape clearly. Have you noticed how often you fill silence with noise, music, podcasts, endless scrolling, simply to avoid being alone with your thoughts? Solitude is frightening because in solitude the unconscious begins to speak. And the unconscious is not always polite. It reveals desires, fears, resentments you would rather ignore. This is why Jung's process of individuation required not just intellectual study, but direct confrontation with the unconscious. He met his inner shadows in solitude, and through that confrontation, he found freedom from them. The parts of yourself you refuse to meet will always be the parts others can use against you. If you are still with me, listening closely, it tells me something about you. It tells me you are not satisfied with surface living. You want depth. You want sovereignty. Most people would have already clicked away, seeking something easier, lighter, more comfortable. But if you remain, it is because something in you longs to stand firmly in your own soil. And if that is true, I invite you not just to listen passively, but to continue this journey with me. Subscribe, not as a casual gesture, but as a statement of intention, that you choose to cultivate your own sovereignty rather than surrender it. Let us return now to a paradox. Influence is unavoidable. None of us are untouched. From birth we are woven into a fabric of language, custom, expectation. But there is a profound difference between being shaped unconsciously and shaping yourself consciously. Think of a sculptor. A block of marble will always be shaped, either by time, erosion, and chance, or by deliberate chisel. To live unconsciously is to let time and chance shape you. To live consciously is to take the chisel into your own hands. The marble is still shaped, but this time the artist is you. And yet, there is danger even in this. Because in deciding to resist manipulation, some become rigid, closed, suspicious of every influence. They build walls instead of roots. Walls protect, but they also isolate. Roots anchor, yet they also connect to deeper soil. A mind that cannot be manipulated does not shut itself off from influence entirely. It is not brittle. It is resilient. It bends without breaking, absorbs without being consumed, listens without surrendering. This is where philosophy and psychology meet. The Stoics tell us to guard our judgments, for the world cannot touch us without our consent. Jung tells us to integrate the unconscious, so that no hidden force can be used against us. Nietzsche tells us to overcome the herd, to become who we truly are. And modern psychology tells us that awareness, attention, reflection, conscious choice, literally reshapes the brain. These are not separate traditions. They are different languages describing the same truth. Freedom begins when you take responsibility for your own mind. And here we must pause with a question. How often do you notice the space between stimulus and response? How often do you slow down before reacting to a fear, a promise, a temptation? Have you ever practiced saying to yourself, I feel the pull, but I choose to wait? That pause is not weakness. It is strength. It is the practice of sovereignty. Imagine walking through a crowded city square. Billboards light the night sky, each brighter than the last, each demanding your gaze. Screens pulse with images crafted by teams of psychologists and marketers who know precisely how long your eyes will linger, what colors will trigger desire, what words will bypass your rational mind. The crowd rushes past you, phones glowing in their hands, conversations echoing the very slogans those billboards projected. You tell yourself you are different, that you see through the noise. But pause for a moment. How much of what you think is truly independent, and how much is simply the echo of the crowd amplified through you? Carl Jung would say that the danger here is not just external manipulation. The real danger is the shadow, the part of yourself you refuse to see. Because what you ignore in yourself, you will project onto others. And projection is one of the most fertile grounds for manipulation. If you repress anger, you will see enemies everywhere. If you repress envy, you will assume others envy you. If you repress weakness, you will cling desperately to signs of strength. Politicians, advertisers, and influencers have long understood this. They need only hint at the enemies you already imagine, the desires you already conceal, the fears you already carry. And suddenly you are not deciding, you are reacting. Think of history's darkest manipulations, the rise of regimes that turned neighbors into enemies, communities into mobs. These movements did not create hatred from nothing. They activated the shadow in millions of individuals, giving them permission to project it outward. Jung warned that the most dangerous things in the world are immense accumulations of human beings who are manipulated by the shadow. If you have not faced your own darkness, others can and will weaponize it against you. So the work of freedom begins not with the world, but with yourself. Can you admit to yourself that you feel envy? That you feel fear? That you feel rage? Can you acknowledge these truths without shame, without repression, without pretending to be cleaner than you are? The moment you do, those emotions lose their grip. You no longer need to project them outward, no longer need to cling to external figures who promise to carry them for you. Integration is not easy. It is painful, but a mind that integrates its own shadow is far harder to manipulate. Modern psychology confirms what Jung intuited. Daniel Kahneman showed us that human beings rely on shortcuts, heuristics, to make decisions. These shortcuts save time and energy, but they also open us to bias. We mistake familiarity for truth, a pattern called the mere exposure effect. We mistake confidence for accuracy, following those who speak loudly even when they are wrong. We cling to the first piece of information we hear, the anchoring bias, even when better evidence arrives later. If you think you are immune, notice how often you still check reviews before buying, how easily a star rating shapes your decision, how a simple phrase like "limited time" only nudges you to act faster. These are not accidents. They are manipulations aimed directly at the biases Kahneman revealed. But here lies hope. Awareness of bias weakens its grip. Neuroscience tells us that the prefrontal cortex, the rational part of the brain, can override the impulsive limbic system when given time and attention. That is why slowing down matters. It gives the rational mind a chance to step in. Have you ever regretted a decision you made in haste, wishing you had paused for just a moment longer? That pause is not trivial. It is the space in which freedom lives. The unmanipulated mind is not the one that never feels bias. It is the one that notices bias before it hardens into action. Let me give you a story. A man named Robert worked as a mid-level manager in a large company. He prided himself on being rational, immune to manipulation. But he often found himself swayed by his charismatic boss, agreeing to projects he did not believe in, supporting policies he quietly doubted. Why? Because he admired the boss's confidence. It took months before Robert realized he was not persuaded by arguments, but by tone. His anchoring bias, the instinct to trust authority and confidence, was being played like a piano. Once he recognized this, he began pausing before agreeing, asking himself, "Do I agree with the idea, or am I just following the performance?" Slowly, he regained his independence. The manipulation did not vanish, but it lost its invisible power. Now consider solitude. Solitude has always been feared, because solitude removes the noise of the crowd. And when the noise fades, you are left with yourself. Kierkegaard called this the dizziness of freedom. Alone, you can no longer hide behind the collective. Your beliefs, your desires, your fears, there is no one else to carry them for you. Most people avoid solitude for precisely this reason. They drown silence with music, podcasts, constant scrolling. Not because they crave information, but because they fear themselves. Yet solitude is the crucible of individuation. Jung spent years in dialogue with his inner figures, facing visions that others would dismiss as madness. Out of this solitude, he emerged with insights into archetypes, the collective unconscious, and the shadow. Solitude stripped him of the crowd's noise and forced him to hear the deeper voice within. And this is not just mystical. Neuroscience shows that when the brain is at rest, when you are not consumed by tasks or entertainment, the default mode network activates. This network is linked to self-reflection, integration of memory, and creativity. Solitude literally reconfigures your brain, weaving your experiences into a coherent whole. Without it, you remain fragmented, vulnerable to the next external influence. But solitude must be chosen, not forced. Isolation without purpose leads to despair. But chosen solitude, time spent deliberately away from noise, leads to integration. Have you ever noticed how your best insights often arrive when you are walking alone, showering, or staring at the sky? That is the mind, freed from noise, making connections it could not make while distracted. A mind that cannot be manipulated is a mind that has learned to value solitude as a source of strength, not a void to be feared. At this point, you might be asking, isn't it exhausting to live with such constant awareness? To question influences, examine desires, confront shadows, embrace solitude? Wouldn't it be easier just to surrender, to float with the current, to let the world think and choose for you? And yes, it would be easier, at least in the short term. But easy paths rarely lead to freedom. Jung said that no tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. To build a mind that cannot be manipulated, you must allow your roots to reach into the depths of your own psyche. That means facing fears, examining desires, and questioning the narratives handed to you. It is not easy, but it is the price of sovereignty. Consider again the crowd in the city square, dazzled by billboards and screens. Most of them are not evil. They are not foolish. They are simply unexamined. They live by borrowed thoughts, unconscious projections, unnoticed biases. To step away from that crowd, even for a moment, is to risk loneliness. But in that loneliness lies clarity, and clarity is the seed of freedom. You may wonder why I speak to you directly, as though you and I were sitting in a quiet room rather than separated by screens. It is because freedom begins in the individual. It cannot be mass-produced. It cannot be handed down like a slogan. It must be chosen each time by a mind willing to reflect. And if you are still listening, if you have walked with me through shadow, bias, and solitude, then you are not merely listening. You are already practicing. Pause with me here. Notice your breathing. Notice the thoughts flickering in your mind as you listen. Ask yourself, what in me resists these ideas? What in me hungers for them? Where do I feel the tug of agreement, and where do I feel the urge to turn away? These questions are not distractions. They are the beginning of sovereignty. Each time you notice your own reactions, you reclaim a piece of your mind from manipulation. There is a story told of Socrates walking through the marketplace of Athens. Stalls overflowed with goods, jewelry, fine fabrics, exotic spices. His companions expected him to buy, to indulge. But Socrates merely walked slowly, studying each booth, and then smiled. "How many things there are," he said, "of which I have no need." What he meant was not disdain for the marketplace, but freedom from it. The goods held no sway over him, because he had examined his desires and seen them clearly. He was not a slave to the whisper of novelty or status. He could walk through the heart of temptation untouched. That, in essence, is the picture of a mind that cannot be manipulated. But notice something subtle. Socrates did not avoid the marketplace. He did not isolate himself in the desert. He walked right into the center of influence and remained free. The goal is not escape, but presence. To build a mind that cannot be manipulated is not to flee from society, but to walk through it with clarity. You still read the news, but you ask, what fear is this story trying to awaken? You still see advertisements, but you pause asking, do I want this or do I want to be seen wanting this? You still hear the crowd, but you recognize the archetypes being played, the shadows being projected. Influence does not vanish, but it loses its invisible grip. Marcus Aurelius, surrounded by the immense pressures of empire, reminded himself each morning, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Notice the simplicity. He did not say you have power over others. He did not say you have power over the chaos of the world. He said, your mind. And this is where every philosophy, every psychology, every wisdom tradition converges. You cannot stop the world from trying to manipulate you, but you can strengthen the citadel of your mind so that influence passes through like wind through open hands. This requires daily practice. Freedom is not a one-time revelation. It is a habit. Each day the world offers hooks, fear, temptation, belonging, authority. And each day you must notice them. Sometimes you will fall. You will click the bait, buy the thing, follow the crowd. But even then, you can pause afterward, examine the strings, and learn. Over time, the strings become visible before they tighten. Awareness grows, and slowly, you discover that you are not as easily moved as you once were. But let me be honest, complete immunity is impossible. Influence is part of being human. We are born into language, into culture, into relationship. And this is not weakness. It is our strength. The danger is not influence itself, it is unconscious influence. To live unconsciously is to be like a leaf in the wind. To live consciously is to be like a sailor with a rudder. The winds still blow, the waves still rise, but you have a hand on the helm. You steer. You choose. Jung's great insight was that freedom does not come from denial, but from integration. Deny your shadow, and you are ruled by it. Integrate your shadow, and you disarm manipulation at its root. Kahneman showed that biases distort thought, but by becoming aware of those biases, by slowing down and practicing reflection, you can counteract them. The Stoics warned against being swept up by judgments, but they also showed that judgments are within your control, if only you pause and examine them. All of these traditions point to one truth. Sovereignty of the mind is possible, but only through vigilance and courage. What would it mean for you today to take that seriously? To pause before reacting to the next story that stirs outrage? To notice when desire rises in you, not to suppress it, but to ask where it comes from? To practice solitude not as escape, but as training, a way of hearing your own voice amidst the crowd? These are not lofty abstractions. They are small, daily acts of sovereignty. Each one is a stone in the fortress of your mind. Let us not pretend that this is merely personal. A society of unmanipulated minds is harder to govern through fear, harder to sell to through insecurity, harder to divide through projection. A single individual who cannot be manipulated is a small thing, but a community of such individuals is a revolution. That is why philosophers and psychologists alike insist that freedom of the mind is not just a private virtue, it is a public necessity. The less conscious people are, the easier they are to control. And history has shown again and again what happens when crowds surrender sovereignty. So here we arrive at a deeper challenge. This is not only about protecting yourself, it is about participating in the slow, difficult work of creating a society less vulnerable to manipulation. Each time you integrate your shadow, each time you resist unconscious bias, each time you pause before fear or temptation, you are not only liberating yourself, you are contributing to a collective liberation. Freedom begins alone, but it does not end alone. Now we stand at the threshold of conclusion. You have walked with me through shadow, through bias, through solitude, through the crowd. You have seen that manipulation is not only external, but internal. That the enemy is not only the propagandist, but the unexamined self. You have seen that sovereignty is not isolation, but conscious participation. That the mind cannot avoid influence, but it can learn to choose which influences to embrace. And so I leave you with this. The unmanipulated mind is not a fortress sealed against the world. It is a clear mirror. It reflects fear without absorbing it. It reflects desire without clinging to it. It reflects the crowd without dissolving into it. It reflects the shadow without being ruled by it. To live with such a mind is not to escape life, but to live it more fully, more freely, more consciously. Ask yourself, then, what will you do with your own mind? Will you allow it to remain a canvas painted by others, a script written by forces you do not see? Or will you take the chisel into your own hands, sculpting a self that is rooted, sovereign, awake? The answer cannot be given to you. It can only be chosen. And if you feel the stir of that choice, if you feel the weight of this challenge, then stay with this journey. Not because of me, but because of yourself. Subscribe not as a button pressed, but as a vow that you will not surrender your mind cheaply. That you will choose reflection over impulse, solitude over noise, clarity over confusion. That you will walk into the marketplace, into the crowd, into the chaos of life, and remain free. For the greatest act of rebellion in an age of manipulation is a mind that sees clearly, feels deeply, and chooses consciously. That mind is rare. That mind is powerful. That mind, perhaps, could be yours.